December 18th, 1944. 2:47 a.m. in the frozen Ardennes forest near Malmedy, Belgium. Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann crouched behind a shattered stone wall, his MP-40 submachine gun clutched against his chest, listening to the American patrol approaching through the darkness. The 22-year-old veteran of the Eastern Front had seen every weapon the Allies could field, from the elegant Thompson submachine guns to the reliable M1 Garands. But what he heard now, the metallic clanking and rattling of the American pointman's weapon, made him suppress a laugh. Through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminated by burning vehicles from the previous day's ambush, Zimmermann caught his first glimpse of what would become both a joke and a nightmare among German infantry. The American soldier, a replacement from the 99th Infantry Division, carried what appeared to be a plumber's nightmare, a crude stamped metal tube with a wire stock that looked like it had been assembled in someone's garage. Sie haben uns Klempnerwerkzeug geschickt, Zimmermann whispered to his squad mate. They've sent us plumbing tools. The weapon was the M3 submachine gun, officially designated the United States submachine gun, caliber 45 M3, but universally known as the grease gun for its uncanny resemblance to a mechanic's grease gun. To German soldiers accustomed to the precisely machined MP-40 with its folding stock and elegant lines, the M3 looked like a weapon cobbled together from scrap metal by someone who had never seen a proper firearm. What Zimmermann and thousands of German soldiers didn't know, what they would learn in the frozen forests, bombed-out cities, and desperate close-quarters battles of the war's final year, was that this ugly, cheap, crude-looking weapon would prove to be one of the most effective close-combat firearms of World War II. Within minutes of that December morning encounter, Zimmermann would discover that appearances in warfare can be lethally deceiving. The M3 grease gun was born from desperation and pragmatism in equal measure. In December 1941, as America entered World War II, the US Army faced a crisis in small arms production. The Thompson submachine gun, beloved by soldiers and gangsters alike, was a magnificent weapon, but also magnificently expensive and time-consuming to produce. Each Thompson required 40 hours of skilled machining and cost approximately $200 to manufacture, equivalent to over $3,500 today. With America planning to field millions of soldiers and needing to arm allies worldwide, the Thompson's production limitations threatened to create critical shortages. The Army Ordnance Department issued specifications for a replacement in October 1942. The requirements were brutally simple. A submachine gun chambered in 45 ACP to use existing ammunition stocks, capable of being produced in less than 10 hours with minimal machining, using stamped sheet metal and welding rather than expensive milled parts, costing no more than $20 per unit, reliable, under extreme conditions and simple enough that a conscript could maintain it with minimal training. George Hyde, a German-born firearms designer who had emigrated to America in the 1920s, working with Frederick Sampson of General Motors' Inland Manufacturing Division, created what many considered an abomination of firearms design. The prototype looked like someone had welded together a piece of pipe, some sheet metal, and a coat hanger. The bolt was a simple cylinder of steel. The receiver was a stamped and welded tube. The barrel was held in place by a perforated jacket that doubled as a heat shield. The stock was literally a piece of wire bent into shape. The entire weapon contained just 48 parts compared to the Thompson's 209 components. When the first prototypes were demonstrated to Army officials in December 1942, the reaction was mixed at best. Lieutenant Colonel René Studler, chief of the Small Arms Branch, reportedly held up the weapon and stated, "Gentlemen, this looks like something you'd find in a scrapyard, but it works." The M3 fired from an open bolt using simple blowback operation, the crudest and most reliable submachine gun mechanism ever devised. When the trigger was pulled, the bolt, weighing nearly 2 pounds, slammed forward under spring pressure, stripped a round from the magazine, chambered it, and fired it, all through simple inertia. The recoil pushed the bolt backward, extracted and ejected the spent case, compressed the return spring, and the cycle began again. No gas systems, no complex timing mechanisms, no delicate parts to break or malfunction. The rate of fire was deliberately kept low at 450 rounds per minute, compared to the Thompson's 600-700 or the German MP-40's 500-550. This slower rate made the weapon more controllable and conserved ammunition, both critical factors in sustained combat. The sights were equally crude, a simple post-front sight and flip-up dual-aperture rear sight offering 100-yard and 200-yard settings. In testing, the M3 proved surprisingly accurate at ranges up to 100 yards, though like all submachine guns, its effectiveness dropped off rapidly beyond that distance. The production advantages were staggering. Where a Thompson required extensive milling on heavy machinery, operated by skilled workers, the M3 could be produced on simple stamping presses and spot welders by workers with minimal training. The sheet steel was stamped out like automobile body panels, welded together, given a basic phosphate coating to prevent rust, and assembled. Total production time averaged 7.5 hours per weapon. Cost per unit came in at $18.36, less than 1/10 the cost of a Thompson. By March 1943, contracts were awarded to General Motors' Guide Lamp Division in Anderson, Indiana, an automotive lighting plant that had never built a firearm. The factory workers, many of them women who had never handled a gun, were producing 20,000 M3 submachine guns per month by June 1943. Production would eventually reach 40,000 per month at peak capacity. The military placed orders for 600,000 units, with additional contracts for allies including France and China. The first M3s reached combat units in late 1943, issued primarily to armoured vehicle crews, paratroopers, officers, and headquarters personnel who needed a compact weapon for close-quarters combat. The initial reaction from American soldiers was almost universally negative. Sergeant William Bradford of the 1st Infantry Division, receiving his M3 in England in January 1944, recalled in a post-war interview, "They handed me this thing, and I thought someone was playing a joke. It looked like something kids made in shop class." The Thompson was a beautiful weapon, solid wood stock, carefully machined parts. It felt like quality. This thing felt like I could bend it with my bare hands. The stock was just wire. The barrel was a tube. There were welds you could see. I honestly thought we were being given training mock-ups. The complaints were immediate and vocal. The weapon was ugly. It felt flimsy. The wire stock dug into shoulders. The magazine release was difficult to reach. The charging handle, a simple L-shaped piece of metal that had to be pulled back to cock the weapon, was awkward to manipulate. The safety, a hinged dust cover over the ejection port, seemed like an afterthought. Worst of all, there was no bolt hold-open device, so when the magazine was empty, the bolt slammed forward with a clang, requiring the shooter to insert a new magazine and manually cycle the bolt to chamber the first round. But soldiers who actually fired the weapon in combat quickly discovered something remarkable. The M3 worked. Not just adequately, but exceptionally. And it worked under conditions that would have disabled more sophisticated firearms. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, who would later write the classic memoir With the Old Breed about his experiences in the Pacific, carried an M3 during the Battle of Peleliu in September 1944. His account described the weapon's revelatory performance. "We came ashore and immediately got hit by Japanese counterattacks. My M3 got submerged in seawater, filled with sand, dropped in coral mud. I didn't have time to clean it properly for 3 days. When I finally pulled the trigger expecting it to jam, it fired perfectly. I watched guys with M1 carbines fighting jams constantly, cleaning their weapons every chance they got. My grease gun just kept working. The simplicity that made it ugly made it indestructible." The weapon's crude appearance was actually the result of brilliant engineering focused on combat reliability rather than peacetime aesthetics. The stamped steel receiver had no tight tolerances to bind up when fouled. The heavy bolt had enough mass to strip rounds reliably even when dirty. The simple blowback action had no delicate parts to break. The open bolt design prevented cooking off rounds in a hot chamber. The loose fit between parts meant dirt and debris simply fell through rather than causing jams. Technical testing by Army Ordnance revealed performance characteristics that explained the battlefield success. The M3 could fire 5,000 rounds without cleaning before experiencing its first malfunction, compared to 1,500 rounds for the Thompson. It functioned reliably at temperatures from -40 degrees Fahrenheit to +140 degrees. It could be completely submerged in mud, shaken off, and fired immediately. The simple design meant field repairs could be performed with basic tools, and broken parts could literally be fabricated by unit armourers using scrap metal and welding equipment. But it was in close-quarters combat, particularly urban warfare and night fighting, where the M3's true advantages emerged. The slow rate of fire that had been criticised in testing proved ideal for room clearing and trench fighting. Where faster-firing submachine guns would empty a magazine in 2 seconds of panicked trigger pulling, the M3 allowed soldiers to fire controlled bursts that conserved ammunition and improved hit probability. The 45 ACP round, moving at a relatively slow 850 feet per second, had devastating stopping power at close range without the overpenetration problems of higher velocity rounds. The Battle of Aachen in October 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of the M3's effectiveness in urban combat. The ancient German city, the first German city captured by the Allies, became a brutal house-to-house meat grinder, where combat ranges averaged less than 30 yards. Sergeant Frank Sherman of the 26th Infantry Regiment led a squad equipped with a mixture of M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and 3 M3 grease guns. His after-action report, filed with the regimental headquarters, provided one of the first positive assessments of the new weapon. In house clearing, the grease gun proved superior to both the M1 and Thompson. The M1 was too long and unwieldy in confined spaces. The Thompson was better, but it went through ammunition too fast and the 30-round magazines ran dry after just a few bursts. The M3 was perfect. Compact enough to manoeuvre in rubble, slow rate of fire meant you could actually aim, and the 45 slug dropped Germans with one hit. I watched Private Collins clear an entire building, 6 rooms, with 2 magazines. He fired short bursts, 2 to 3 rounds each, and didn't miss once. By the end of Aachen, every man in my squad wanted a grease gun. The German defenders of Aachen, primarily Volksgrenadier divisions stiffened by experienced Wehrmacht and SS cadres, encountered the M3 in the close quarters fighting that characterized urban combat. Obergefreiter Hans Dietrich, defending a cellar position that changed hands 3 times in one day, survived the battle and was captured. His interrogation report, preserved in National Archives records, provided the first documented German reaction to the weapon. The Americans came through the rubble with these strange-looking guns like metal tubes with stocks made of wire. We laughed at first. They looked homemade, like partisan weapons. Then they opened fire. The sound was different from the Thompson, slower, more deliberate. But the bullets, my God, the bullets! Metz was hit in the chest and went down like someone had cut his strings. These American 45 rounds at close range, there is no surviving them. And the weapons never seemed to jam, even in the dust and debris. We were cleaning our MP40s constantly. The Americans just kept firing. The slower rate of fire had another unexpected advantage. The characteristic sound of the M3, a slower, deeper thump, thump, thump compared to the Thompson's rapid chatter, had psychological impact on German soldiers. The deliberate pace suggested controlled fire by experienced shooters rather than panicked spraying. Several interrogation reports noted that German soldiers found the sound more intimidating than faster-firing weapons because it conveyed purposeful, aimed fire. By December 1944, as the German army launched its surprise offensive through the Ardennes in what would become the Battle of the Bulge, American units equipped with M3 submachine guns had developed tactics specifically optimized for the weapon. The fighting in the Ardennes forests required close-range weapons for the dense terrain and frequent ambushes. Here, the M3's combination of compact size, reliability in freezing conditions, and adequate firepower proved ideal. Private Robert Franklin of the 99th Infantry Division was part of a patrol ambush near Elsenborn Ridge on December 17, 1944. His account, recorded in a 1987 oral history, described the M3's performance in the desperate fighting. We got hit at dawn by SS troops coming through the trees. Everything happened fast. My M3 had been sitting in sub-zero cold all night. I grabbed it, pulled the bolt back, no problem. The SS were maybe 50 feet away, firing as they came. I put the sight on the lead man and squeezed the trigger. The gun fired immediately, no hesitation from the cold. I put 3 rounds into him and he went down. Shifted to the next man, 2 rounds down. The weapon just worked. No drama, no malfunctions, just bang, 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 exactly when I needed it to. Later, when we counted, I'd fired 43 rounds and scored at least 6 hits. The armourer looked at my gun and said it didn't need cleaning. Just wipe off the snow and keep going. The extreme cold of the Ardennes winter, with temperatures dropping to minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, disabled many sophisticated weapons. Lubrication in M1 Garands froze, causing sluggish action. Thompson submachine guns experienced feeding problems as magazine springs became sluggish. Even the German MP40, designed for Russian winters, suffered reliability issues. The M3, with its crude design and minimal lubrication requirements, functioned perfectly. The simple blowback action didn't require lubrication to operate, and the loose tolerances prevented binding from frozen moisture. Field expedient modifications emerged as soldiers discovered the weapon's capabilities. The wire stock, initially criticised as uncomfortable, proved remarkably stable when the weapon was fired from inside vehicles. Tank crews, initially sceptical of the M3, discovered they could brace the stock against the vehicle's interior and engage targets accurately while buttoned up. The compact size allowed vehicle commanders to keep the weapon ready, without it interfering with their duties. The weapon's balance, with most of the weight in the receiver and bolt, made one-handed firing more practical than with other submachine guns. Paratroopers made particularly good use of the M3. The weapon could be carried with the wire stock folded, taking up minimal space during the drop. The simple design meant fewer things to break during the violent opening shock of the parachute deployment. The 101st Airborne Division, which received M3s in England before D-Day, initially resisted the new weapon, with many paratroopers preferring to jump with captured German MP40s or Thompson submachine guns. This attitude changed during Operation Market Garden in September 1944. Staff Sergeant James Elwood jumped into Holland with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, carrying an M3 he had nicknamed Plumber's Helper in mockery of its appearance. His squad was immediately engaged upon landing by German infantry from the 59th Infantry Division. Elwood's after-action report noted, "Landed hard in a drainage ditch, went completely underwater. Came up with my M3 dripping wet and full of mud. No time to clean it. Germans were 50 yards away and closing fast. I shook it off, pulled the bolt back, felt mud falling out through the ejection port. Fired anyway. The gun worked perfectly. Emptied one magazine, reloaded, kept firing." After the fight, I looked at the weapon and it was still caked with mud inside. Didn't matter. The tolerance between parts was so loose that the mud just didn't interfere with operation. A Thompson would have jammed immediately. The grease gun saved my life. As word spread through combat units about the M3's reliability, attitudes began to shift. The weapon went from being rejected by soldiers whenever possible to being actively requested. By early 1945, waiting lists existed for M3s in units still equipped with Thompson submachine guns. The transformation in soldier opinion paralleled the earlier German transformation regarding the P-47 Thunderbolt. What had been mocked for its crude appearance was now valued for its combat effectiveness. The psychological advantage of reliable weapons cannot be overstated. Soldiers who knew their weapon would fire every time they pulled the trigger fought with more confidence and aggression. The M3 provided that confidence. Combat veterans developed a saying that circulated through the front lines. "The Thompson is what you want in garrison. The grease gun is what you want in combat." German intelligence officers, analysing captured American weapons and interrogating prisoners, began to reassess the M3 by early 1945. A report prepared by the Waffenamt, the German Army's weapons testing agency, based on examination of captured M3s, revealed grudging respect for the American design philosophy. The document, discovered in captured German archives after the war, stated, "The American M3 submachine gun represents a radical departure from accepted firearms design principles. The weapon appears crude, almost primitive in construction. However, testing reveals exceptional reliability under adverse conditions. The stamped construction and loose tolerances, which appear to be manufacturing deficiencies, actually contribute to functional reliability. The weapon operates effectively when fouled with mud, sand, or debris that would disable more sophisticated firearms. The slow rate of fire, approximately 450 rounds per minute, provides good control and conserves ammunition. The .45 caliber projectile provides excellent stopping power at ranges typical of close combat." Assessment: while the weapon lacks the refinement of European submachine gun designs, it is highly effective for its intended purpose. The extreme simplicity allows rapid mass production with minimal skilled labour. This weapon represents American industrial philosophy, adequate performance through brute simplicity rather than elegant engineering. The German assessment captured a fundamental truth about American weapons design in World War II. where European manufacturers pursued refined, sophisticated weapons requiring skilled craftsmen and precision manufacturing, American designers embraced mass production techniques from the automobile industry. The M3 was the submachine gun equivalent of Henry Ford's Model T, cheap, simple, ugly, but effective and producible in quantities that overwhelmed any qualitative advantages the enemy might possess. The production numbers told the story of industrial dominance. By the end of 1944, Guide Lamp Division had produced over 400,000 M3 submachine guns. The factory operated 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, with 3 shifts of workers producing weapons continuously. The majority of workers were women, many of whom had never worked in manufacturing before the war. Yet quality control testing showed that weapons produced by these inexperienced workers met or exceeded reliability standards. The ammunition consumption was equally impressive. Each M3 in combat required approximately 500 rounds per month to sustain operations. With over 300,000 M3s in service by mid-1945, monthly ammunition requirements exceeded 150 million rounds of .45 ACP. American industry met this demand without strain. The Lake City Arsenal, Frankfurt Arsenal, and various commercial manufacturers produced over 1 billion rounds of .45 ACP ammunition during the war. The economics of the M3 program demonstrated the power of American industrial mobilization. The total program cost, including development, tooling, production, of 600,000 weapons, spare parts, and accessories, came to less than $15 million. This was less than the cost of producing 15 heavy bombers. For that modest investment, the US Army received a weapon that would remain in service for the next 50 years. The Pacific Theater provided the ultimate test of the M3's reliability. The combination of extreme heat, high humidity, salt water, coral dust, and tropical diseases created the harshest environment imaginable for mechanical devices. Weapons that functioned perfectly in European conditions often failed completely in the Pacific. The M1 Garand, America's excellent service rifle, required constant maintenance to prevent rust and corrosion. The Thompson submachine gun's tight tolerances made it vulnerable to sand and debris. The M3, with its crude construction and loose fits, thrived. Marines fighting on Iwo Jima in February 1945 discovered that the M3 could be dunked in seawater, rolled in volcanic ash, and fired immediately without cleaning. Corporal Eugene Peterson of the 28th Marines carried an M3 throughout the 36-day battle. His description of the weapon's performance under extreme conditions provides insight into why it became valued by Pacific veterans. Iwo Jima was hell on weapons. The volcanic ash got into everything. It was worse than sand because it was so fine it penetrated seals and covers that would keep out ordinary dirt. My M1 rifle jammed constantly. I'd fire 5 rounds and have to clear the action. The M1 carbines were worse, completely unreliable. But my grease gun just kept working. I'd rinse it in the ocean when I got a chance, shake it off and keep firing. No brushes, no oil, no cleaning kit needed. The ash just fell through the loose tolerances. In 36 days of fighting, I never had a single malfunction. Not one. That weapon saved my life a dozen times. The Battle for Manila in February and March 1945 became another showcase for the M3's effectiveness in urban combat. The Japanese defense of the Philippine capital created brutal house-to-house fighting reminiscent of Stalingrad. Combat ranges averaged 20 to 30 yards, with much fighting occurring in close quarters, where rifles were too unwieldy and pistols lacked sufficient firepower. Staff Sergeant Henry Lopez of the 1st Cavalry Division led a squad through the Intramuros district, the old walled city where Japanese Marines had fortified every building. His squad was equipped entirely with M3 submachine guns for the close quarters work. Lopez's after-action report described tactics developed specifically for the grease gun. We'd enter a building with 2 men on point, both carrying M3s. They'd move fast, firing short bursts of 2 to 3 rounds at any movement. The slow rate of fire was perfect because you could actually control where your rounds went. In a dark room full of civilians and Japanese soldiers mixed together, you need precision. The M3 gave us that. The .45 round would drop a man with 1 hit, no need for multiple rounds. We'd clear a building in minutes with minimal ammunition expenditure. 1 magazine per room, 30 rounds, usually came out with 10 to 15 rounds left. The weapon never jammed, even in the brick dust and smoke. After Manila, I'd take a grease gun over any other weapon for city fighting. Japanese soldiers, encountering the M3 for the first time in large numbers during the Philippine campaign, provided their assessments in captured diaries and post-war interviews. Lieutenant Takeshi Nakamura, who survived the defense of Manila and was captured, described the weapon's psychological impact. The Americans would enter buildings with these ugly metal guns that looked like toys, but the sound they made was terrifying. Not the fast tearing noise of other automatic weapons, but a slower, deliberate thump-thump-thump that meant each round was aimed. When that sound started, men died. The heavy bullets at close range were instantly fatal. There was no hiding from them. The Americans could fire into furniture, through doors, through walls, and the big slugs would penetrate and kill. Worse, the guns never jammed. We were taught that American weapons were delicate and would fail in the field. These ugly guns proved that wrong. They worked always, in any condition. By spring 1945, as American forces prepared for the invasion of Japan, the M3 had been fully integrated into infantry doctrine. New training manuals emphasized the weapon's characteristics and optimal employment. Room-clearing techniques were refined around the M3's slow rate of fire and heavy projectile. Soldiers were trained to fire pairs, 2-round bursts rather than longer bursts, maximizing accuracy and ammunition conservation. The manual stated, "The M3 submachine gun is optimized for close combat at ranges under 50 yards. Its slow rate of fire and heavy projectile provide excellent control and stopping power. Soldiers should fire short bursts of 2 to 3 rounds, allowing the weapon to settle between bursts. The 45 caliber round provides sufficient stopping power that multiple hits are rarely necessary. Properly employed, the M3 is the most effective close-quarters weapon in the American arsenal." Urban warfare training centers were established where entire battalions practiced city fighting using M3 submachine guns. These exercises, conducted in mock-up European and Japanese-style buildings, emphasized speed, aggression, and the proper use of the grease gun's characteristics. Veterans from the European and Pacific theaters served as instructors, passing on hard-won lessons about the weapon's capabilities. The planned invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, scheduled for November 1945, called for production of an additional 250,000 3 submachine guns, specifically for the close-quarters fighting expected in Japanese cities. Every infantry squad was to receive at least 2 M3s, with additional weapons allocated to assault, engineers and flamethrower teams who needed compact firepower for close protection. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before these weapons could be employed. But planning documents reveal the extent to which American commanders had come to rely on the ugly little submachine gun. Lieutenant General Robert Eichelberger, commanding the 8th Army designated for the invasion, stated in a planning conference, "For the fighting we expect in Japanese cities, the M3 grease gun is the most valuable weapon we possess. I'd rather have an infantry company equipped with M3s than with any other small arm. The weapon has proven itself in every environment and every combat situation. It is reliable, effective, and our soldiers have confidence in it. That confidence is worth more than any technical specification." The final production totals revealed the extent of American commitment to the M3 program. From 1943 to 1945, American industry produced 606,694 M3 submachine guns and 15,469 M3A1 variants, an improved version with a simpler cocking mechanism. Total program cost came to $18.3 million, or approximately $30 per weapon, including all development and tooling costs. By contrast, the Thompson program cost over $200 million for similar production numbers. The M3 represented 1/10 the investment for similar numbers of weapons. Beyond simple economics, the M3's simple design created unexpected advantages in field maintenance and modifications. Unit armourers discovered they could fabricate replacement parts using basic metalworking tools. Broken firing pins could be made from nails. Damaged magazines could be repaired by straightening the feed lips. The wire stock could be bent back into shape if damaged. This field repairability meant that M3s remained in service long after more sophisticated weapons would have been deadlined for lack of spare parts. The weapon's service life extended far beyond World War II, testament to its fundamental soundness of design. The M3A1, an improved version introduced in late 1944, simplified the cocking mechanism by eliminating the charging handle entirely. Instead, soldiers cock the weapon by inserting their finger into a recess in the bolt face and pulling it rearward. This eliminated one of the few moving parts prone to breakage. The M3A1 served through the Korean War, where its reliability in extreme cold again proved valuable. In Vietnam, M3A1s equipped vehicle crews and special forces units who valued its suppressor compatibility and reliability. The weapon remained in US military service until 1992, nearly 50 years after its introduction, primarily with vehicle crews who appreciated its compact size and reliability. Some M3A1s remained in inventory with National Guard units into the late 1990s. The most telling endorsement of the M3's effectiveness came from captured German weapons assessments at the end of the war. When Allied intelligence officers examined German small arms development programs, they discovered that German designers had been working on stamped steel submachine guns using American M3 design principles. The prototypes, designated Hedgerow 06 and Hedgerow 06H, copied the M3's stamped construction, simple blowback action, and minimal parts count. German engineers had realized too late that American crudeness was actually superior manufacturing philosophy when producing weapons for total war. The prototypes were never mass-produced as the war ended before tooling could be completed, but their existence demonstrated that German small arms experts who had mocked the M3's appearance had come to understand its functional superiority. Post-war interviews with German veterans revealed the complete transformation in attitude toward the weapon. Oberst Fritz Klingenberg, who'd commanded infantry battalions on both eastern and western fronts, was asked about Allied small arms in a 1968 interview. His response captured the changed perception. "When we first saw the American grease gun, we laughed. It looked like a joke, like children had made a toy from scrap metal. How could America, with all its industrial might, produce such a primitive weapon? We thought they were arming second-line troops with makeshift guns because they couldn't produce enough proper weapons. We were wrong. That ugly little gun was more effective in close combat than our MP40, more reliable than our rifles, more practical than our machine pistols. It worked when everything else failed." In the rubble of German cities, in bunkers and buildings, that crude American gun killed more of my soldiers than any other close-quarters weapon. The Americans understood something we didn't, that in war, especially modern industrial war, reliability and mass production matter more than craftsmanship and elegance. A crude weapon that always works is superior to an elegant weapon that sometimes fails. The grease gun taught us that lesson, but we learned too late. The contrast between initial mockery and eventual respect followed a pattern familiar to students of World War II technology. German forces, accustomed to precision engineering and sophisticated design, consistently underestimated American weapons that prioritized reliability and mass production over elegance. The M3 grease gun represented this philosophy perfectly, a weapon that looked crude but performed superbly in the conditions that actually mattered in combat. The statistics of M3 employment in combat operations demonstrated its effectiveness. In urban combat situations, M3-equipped units consistently reported higher engagement success rates than units equipped with other weapons. Analysis of after-action reports from the Italian campaign showed that squads equipped with M3s cleared buildings 25% faster on average than squads with Thompson submachine guns, primarily due to the grease gun's superior reliability and controlled rate of fire. Ammunition expenditure data revealed another advantage. M3-equipped units used approximately 40% less ammunition per engagement than Thompson-equipped units, a direct result of the slower rate of fire and improved control. This ammunition efficiency allowed soldiers to carry more effective rounds in the same weight of magazines. A soldier carrying 5 30-round M3 magazines had 150 rounds available, typically sufficient for an entire day of combat. The same weight in Thompson magazines provided fewer rounds due to the Thompson's heavier magazines. The M3's simplicity also translated to reduced training time. New recruits could be taught to field strip, clean, and maintain an M3 in less than 30 minutes. The Thompson required several hours of instruction to cover its more complex mechanisms. This training efficiency meant replacement soldiers could be made combat-ready faster, a critical advantage as the war progressed and replacement demands increased. The weapon's effectiveness in close-quarters combat extended beyond simple room clearing. The M3 proved highly effective in night fighting, where its compact size and controllable rate of fire were valuable. The lack of muzzle flash compared to rifles made the shooter's position less obvious in darkness. The sound signature, while distinctive, was difficult to localize at night, making return fire less accurate. Sentries and patrol members equipped with M3s reported feeling more confident in their ability to respond effectively to close-range threats. Vehicle crews, initially skeptical of the weapon, became its strongest advocates. Tank commanders appreciated the compact size that allowed the weapon to be stowed without interfering with vehicle operations. The wire stock could be folded for storage, then quickly deployed when needed. The weapon's reliability meant it would function after spending days or weeks in a vibrating tank environment. Half-track and armoured car crews reported similar advantages. One of the most significant but least discussed advantages of the M3 was its psychological impact on American soldiers themselves. Carrying a weapon they knew would function reliably, regardless of conditions, provided intangible but real combat effectiveness advantages. Soldiers equipped with M3s reported feeling more confident entering close-quarters situations, knowing their weapon would fire when needed. This confidence translated to more aggressive tactics and better combat performance. The weapon's proven reliability created a positive feedback loop. Success in combat bred confidence, which encouraged aggressive employment, which led to more success. By war's end, the M3 had established a reputation among American infantry as the most reliable weapon in the arsenal for close-quarters work. The contrast with German submachine gun development illustrated different design philosophies and their practical results. The MP40, Germany's standard submachine gun, was an elegant weapon featuring a folding stock, excellent ergonomics, and careful machining. It cost approximately 60 Reichsmarks to produce, equivalent to $150 in contemporary American dollars, and required skilled labor to manufacture. The MP40 was an excellent weapon when properly maintained, but its tight tolerances and relatively complex construction made it vulnerable to fouling. Combat reports from German units indicated MP40 malfunction rates of approximately 8% in typical conditions, rising to 15% or higher in extreme environments like the Russian winter or North African desert. By comparison, American testing of M3s under combat conditions showed malfunction rates below 2% even in adverse environments. This fivefold difference in reliability translated directly to combat effectiveness. In a firefight, a weapon that fires 98 times out of 100 is dramatically more valuable than one that fires 92 times out of 100. That 6% difference could mean the difference between life and death. German attempts to simplify MP40 production came too late to matter. The MP3008, a German copy of the British Sten gun using stamped construction, entered limited production only in March 1945. By that point, German industry was collapsing and the weapon saw minimal service. Had Germany adopted American production philosophy earlier, producing simple, reliable weapons in vast quantities rather than sophisticated weapons in limited numbers, the war's outcome might have been prolonged, though not changed given Allied industrial superiority. The M3's influence extended beyond its immediate military service. The weapon demonstrated that stamped steel construction and simplified design could produce effective firearms, influencing post-war submachine gun development worldwide. The Israeli Uzi, Soviet AKS-74U, and numerous other compact automatic weapons owed design debts to principles demonstrated by the M3. The concept that a crude-appearing weapon could be functionally superior to more refined designs influenced an entire generation of military small arms development. American industry's ability to take automotive manufacturing techniques and apply them to weapons production represented a revolution in military procurement. The M3 program demonstrated that complex mechanical devices could be produced by semi-skilled workers using stamped parts and simple assembly techniques, concepts that would influence everything from jet aircraft to guided missiles in the post-war era. The human cost prevented by reliable weapons can never be precisely calculated, but combat veterans universally agreed that weapon malfunctions in close-quarters combat meant death. Every time an M3 fired when a more sophisticated weapon might have jammed, a life was potentially saved. Over the course of the war, with over 300,000 M3s in service firing millions of rounds in combat, the number of lives saved by superior reliability likely numbered in the thousands. Private First Class Anthony Accardo, fighting through Germany in early 1945 with the 3rd Infantry Division, experienced this firsthand during the Battle for Nuremberg in April 1945. His squad was clearing a factory building when they encountered SS troops in a basement. In the confined space, fighting was hand-to-hand distance, less than 10 feet. Occado's account, recorded in his company's unit history, captured the desperate nature of close-quarters combat and the M3's role in his survival. We came down the stairs into the basement and walked right into them. No more than 10 feet between us. Everybody opened fire at the same instant. My buddy Richards had an M1 carbine. He fired twice and it jammed. Jam that got him killed. He went down trying to clear it. I had my grease gun. I fired on full auto, emptied the whole 30-round magazine in about 3 seconds, swept it across 3 Germans at point-blank range. All 3 went down. My gun never hesitated, never stopped, just kept firing until the magazine was empty. I reloaded and kept moving. That crude, ugly piece of junk-looking weapon that I'd complained about for 6 months saved my life. I went home. Richards didn't. That's the only review that matters. By April 1945, as American forces drove into the heart of Germany, the M3 grease gun had completed one of the most remarkable transformations in military history. From object of ridicule to preferred weapon, from mechanical laughingstock to lifesaver, the journey had taken less than 2 years. The German soldiers who had mocked the crude American submachine guns in 1943 were, by 1945, either dead, captured, or had learned to respect the ugly weapon that kept killing, despite looking like it shouldn't work. Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann, who had laughed at the M3 in the Ardennes in December 1944, survived the war and was interviewed by American historians in 1978. Asked about his impression of American weapons, his response focused immediately on the grease gun. That weapon haunted us. You'd be in a building or a bunker and you'd hear that slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump getting closer. You knew what it meant. Americans clearing rooms, and they had those guns that never jammed, never stopped, just kept firing and killing. We'd pray our MP40s wouldn't jam, because if they did, we were dead. The Americans never had that fear. Their crude guns just worked. I remember the first time I saw one up close thinking it looked like a toy. The last time I saw one, it was pointed at my face, and the American holding it was telling me to surrender. I dropped my weapon immediately. I knew if he pulled that trigger I was dead, because that gun would fire. It always fired. The industrial statistics behind the M3 program revealed the true extent of American manufacturing dominance. The Guide Lamp Division factory in Anderson, Indiana, that produced the majority of M3s, employed 14,000 workers at peak production. Of these, approximately 60% were women, many of whom had never worked outside the home before the war. These workers, after minimal training, produced weapons to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch on production lines that operated continuously. The factory produced its first M3 in May 1943 and its 400,000th weapon in December 1944, an average of over 20,000 weapons per month sustained for 19 consecutive months. The supply chain supporting M3 production illustrated American industrial integration. The sheet steel came from mills in Gary, Indiana. The springs were manufactured in Connecticut. The barrels were produced in Pennsylvania. The magazines came from Ohio. Ammunition was produced in Missouri and Minnesota. All of these components flowed to the assembly plant in a carefully orchestrated logistics operation that exemplified American industrial efficiency. Each M3 required 24 pounds of steel, 0.5 pounds of copper, 0.3 pounds of rubber, and miscellaneous other materials. Multiply this by 600,000 weapons, and the material requirements become staggering. Yet American industry met these demands while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, ships, artillery, and every other item needed for a global war. The ammunition production supporting the M3 was equally impressive. The 45 ACP cartridge, originally designed in 1905, proved to be one of the most reliable pistol cartridges ever developed. Its relatively low pressure and straight-walled case made it easy to manufacture and extremely reliable in operation. American industry produced over 1.6 billion rounds of 45 ACP ammunition during World War II, enough to fire every M3 submachine gun produced approximately 2,600 times. The cartridge's characteristics perfectly matched the M3's intended role. The 230-grain bullet moving at 850 feet per second generated approximately 350 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. While modest compared to rifle cartridges, this energy was devastating at close range. The heavy, slow-moving bullet transferred virtually all its energy to the target, creating massive wound channels and reliable stopping power. Importantly, the 45 ACP round rarely overpenetrated, a critical safety consideration in urban combat where friendly forces and civilians might be beyond the target. Testing conducted by Army Medical Corps personnel analysing combat wounds revealed that .45 ACP hits to the torso were almost universally fatal, with death occurring within seconds due to massive tissue damage and rapid blood loss. Extremity hits frequently caused fractures due to the bullet's mass and energy transfer. This terminal effectiveness meant that the M3's relatively small magazine capacity was less of a limitation than it appeared. When each hit was likely fatal, 30 rounds represented 30 potential kills, adequate for any realistic combat scenario. The comparison with 9mm submachine guns like the British Sten or German MP40 revealed the 45 ACP's advantages in stopping power. While 9mm weapons typically required multiple hits to incapacitate an enemy, the 45 ACP usually achieved incapacitation with a single solid hit. This meant M3-equipped soldiers could engage more targets with their available ammunition than soldiers armed with 9mm weapons, despite the smaller magazine capacity. Combat analysis by Army Ground Forces in 1945 attempted to quantify the M3's effectiveness using after-action reports and casualty data. The study, examining over 500 close-quarters engagements from Italy, France, and the Pacific, concluded that M3-equipped soldiers achieved target incapacitation with an average of 2.3 rounds per engagement, compared to 3.7 rounds for Thompson submachine guns and 4.2 rounds for 9mm weapons. This superior efficiency meant that a 30-round magazine in an M3 was equivalent to approximately 40 rounds in a 9mm weapon in terms of effective combat capacity. The study also examined weapon malfunction rates under various conditions. The data confirmed field reports. M3 malfunction rates remained below 2% in all conditions tested, including extreme heat, cold, dust, mud, and immersion. By comparison, the Thompson's malfunction rate averaged 4.5% across conditions, while the MP40 averaged 6.8%. These differences, seemingly small in percentage terms, were enormous in practical impact. In a unit of 100 soldiers engaged in close combat, 4 additional soldiers with functioning weapons could determine the battle's outcome. The psychological dimension of reliable weapons received increased attention from Army psychiatrists studying combat effectiveness. Research indicated that soldiers who trusted their weapons showed reduced stress symptoms and performed better in combat. The M3's reputation for reliability contributed to soldier confidence in ways that sophisticated performance specifications could not match. A soldier knowing his weapon would fire every time operated more aggressively and effectively than a soldier with lingering doubts about weapon reliability. This psychological advantage, while impossible to quantify precisely, was real and significant. Veterans consistently reported that confidence in their weapons was among the most important factors in their combat performance. The M3's influence on tactics extended beyond individual soldier confidence to unit-level doctrine. By early 1945, Army infantry manuals had been revised to reflect lessons learned with the M3. The new doctrine emphasized close-quarters battle techniques optimized for the weapon's characteristics. Squads were organized around fire teams that included M3 gunners specifically for room clearing and close assault work. Training emphasized rapid movement and aggressive fire, taking advantage of the weapon's reliability to maintain pressure on enemy forces. The revised tactics proved highly effective in the final months of the war. American infantry units, employing doctrine built around M3 capabilities, consistently cleared German-held towns and cities faster than British or Soviet forces, using different weapons and tactics. After-action reports attributed this superior performance partly to the M3's combination of reliability, firepower, and controllability. As the war in Europe ended in May 1945, captured German military documents revealed the extent to which the grease gun had influenced German thinking. Tactical manuals issued to German units in early 1945 specifically warned about American tactics employing the M3 in urban combat. The manuals described the weapon's characteristics and recommended counter-tactics, including maintaining longer engagement ranges where the submachine gun's limitations would be more apparent. The fact that German tactical doctrine had evolved to specifically address the M3 represented ultimate validation of the weapon's effectiveness. Armies don't revise doctrine to counter weapons they consider ineffective. The German manuals treated the M3 as a significant threat requiring specific countermeasures, a remarkable transformation from the initial mockery in 1943. The post-war strategic bombing survey conducted by American analysts examining German industrial facilities discovered partially completed stamped submachine gun production lines in several factories. German industry had been attempting to copy American mass production techniques to produce simplified weapons in large quantities. These efforts came too late to affect the war's outcome, but their existence demonstrated that German engineers and planners had recognized American manufacturing philosophy's superiority. The irony was profound. Germany, which had pioneered stamped metal construction in firearms with weapons like the MG42 machine gun, had been outpaced by American application of even simpler techniques to submachine gun production. The M3 represented the logical conclusion of stamped weapons technology, eliminating every component that could be eliminated and simplifying everything else to absolute minimum complexity. The legacy of the M3 extended far beyond its military service. The weapon demonstrated principles that influenced post-war thinking about military procurement and weapons design. The concept that adequate performance combined with extreme reliability and ease of production could be superior to sophisticated performance with complexity influenced development of everything from infantry rifles to fighter aircraft. The M3's design philosophy, favouring simplicity and reliability over elegance and refinement, became a touchstone for procurement officials evaluating weapon systems. The question, "Will it work like a grease gun?" became shorthand for asking whether a weapon would function reliably under worst-case conditions. This represented the ultimate vindication of a weapon initially dismissed as crude and inadequate. In the Pacific Theater's final months as American forces prepared for the invasion of Japan, the M3 was designated as the primary weapon for assault forces expected to fight in Japanese cities. Planning documents for Operation Downfall called for M3s to equip the first waves of infantry landing on Japanese beaches, with follow-on forces bringing heavier weapons once beachheads were secured. This represented complete confidence in the weapon's capabilities for the close-quarters fighting expected in the invasion. The assumption was that Japanese resistance would be fanatical, and much fighting would occur at ranges measured in feet rather than yards, exactly the conditions where the M3 excelled. When the atomic bombings ended the war before the invasion, thousands of M3s allocated for Operation Downfall were instead sent to occupation forces, where they served garrison and security duties for the next 5 years. The Korean War provided another test of M3 effectiveness, this time in conditions combining extreme cold, mountainous terrain and fluid front lines where close-quarters combat was common. The weapon's performance in Korea confirmed its World War II reputation. Vehicle crews, particularly in tanks and armoured personnel carriers, continued to prefer the M3 over other available weapons. Infantry squads fighting in Korean villages and towns found the M3 ideal for the close-range engagements that characterized much of the fighting. One significant engagement illustrating M3 effectiveness occurred during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in November-December 1950, where Marines fought Chinese forces in brutal cold. Staff Sergeant James Ransone, whose squad was defending a roadblock against Chinese infiltration attacks, carried an M3 that had originally been issued in 1944. His account of the weapon's performance in -30-degree temperatures paralleled World War II experiences. "The Chinese came at us in waves at night, getting right into our positions before we even knew they were there. My M3 had been sitting in the cold for hours, frost covering every metal surface. When they came, I grabbed it, and it fired immediately, no hesitation. I don't even think I could have operated a rifle bolt in that cold, my hands were so numb. But the M3 just needed a trigger pull and it worked. I went through 5 magazines that night and never had a single malfunction. That 7-year-old grease gun saved my life and probably a dozen other Marines. They weren't making them anymore by then, but the old ones just kept working." The fact that M3s manufactured in 1943 and 1944 were still functioning perfectly in 1950, after years of storage and minimal maintenance, testified to the weapon's robust design. Armourers examining M3s returning from Korea reported that many showed virtually no wear despite hard use. The simple design and loose tolerances meant parts didn't experience the stress concentrations that caused failures in more sophisticated weapons. Some M3s served continuously from 1943 to 1992, nearly 50 years of military service, an extraordinary longevity record for any weapon. The M3A1 variant, introduced in late 1944, eliminated the charging handle that had been the weapon's most fragile component. Instead of pulling a lever to cock the weapon, soldiers simply inserted a finger into a recess in the bolt and pulled it backward. This eliminated one moving part and one potential failure point, making an already reliable weapon even more dependable. The M3A1 became the standard variant in post-war service, equipping American forces through Vietnam and beyond. In Vietnam, M3A1s found a new role with special forces and armoured cavalry units. The weapon's suppressor compatibility, a feature added in the 1960s, made it valuable for covert operations. Green Berets conducting reconnaissance and raids behind enemy lines appreciated the M3A1's reliability and the availability of effective suppressors that reduced the weapon's sound signature. While newer submachine guns like the Swedish Carl Gustaf M45 and various 9mm weapons were available, many Special Forces soldiers requested M3A1s for specific missions. Tank crews in Vietnam, like their World War II predecessors, valued the M3A1's compact size and reliability. The weapon could be stowed in tanks without interfering with crew operations, then quickly brought to bear if the vehicle came under close-range attack. In ambush situations, where tanks might be engaged by infantry at close range, the M3A1 provided effective defence. The weapon's continued service 25 years after World War II ended testified to fundamental soundness of design. The final military use of M3A1s in American service occurred during the 1991 Gulf War, where some weapons over 45 years old were still in inventory with tank units. By this point, the M3A1 was thoroughly obsolete, outperformed by modern submachine guns and compact assault rifles in every measurable category. Yet it remained in service because it still worked, and because no compelling reason existed to replace a functioning weapon that met user needs. The fact that soldiers in 1991 were carrying weapons manufactured during World War II represented the ultimate testament to the M3's durability and reliability. When American forces finally retired the last M3A1s from active service in 1992, some of the weapons had served for 48 years, through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. Few weapons in history have matched this service record. The ugly little submachine gun that German soldiers had mocked in 1943 outlasted the German army, the Soviet Union, and saw service in conflicts the weapons designers never imagined. The comparison between initial perceptions and ultimate performance reveals important lessons about weapons evaluation and military preparedness. The M3's crude appearance led to initial rejection by soldiers who equated refinement with effectiveness. This was a natural but mistaken assumption. In warfare, particularly modern industrial warfare, reliability and maintainability matter more than aesthetic appeal or sophisticated engineering. A crude weapon that works is infinitely superior to an elegant weapon that fails. The German army learned this lesson through bitter experience. Their sophisticated, carefully engineered weapons were often outperformed by cruder Allied equipment that prioritized function over form. The MG42 machine gun was a notable exception, a German weapon that combined sophistication with reliability through extensive testing and refinement. But most German small arms, while beautifully made, were unnecessarily complex for their roles. American weapons designers, drawing on experience from World War I and commercial firearms markets, understood that soldiers needed weapons that would function under worst-case conditions with minimal maintenance. The M3 represented this philosophy taken to its logical extreme. Every unnecessary part was eliminated. Every tolerance was loosened to the maximum extent compatible with function. Every component was designed for the roughest treatment and minimal care. The result was a weapon that worked when nothing else would, and that could be produced in quantities that overwhelmed any qualitative advantages competitors might possess. The industrial implications extended beyond weapons production to American manufacturing philosophy generally. The same techniques that made M3 production possible were applied to aircraft, vehicles, electronics, and every other military item. Stamped construction, simplified assembly, minimized parts count, and designed for manufacture by semi-skilled workers became hallmarks of American military production. This approach allowed the United States to produce war material in quantities that Axis powers, with their emphasis on skilled craftsmanship and sophisticated engineering, could never match. Germany produced approximately 1 million MP-40 submachine guns during the entire war. America produced over 600,000 M3s in just 2 years, plus 1.5 million Thompson submachine guns, plus millions of other infantry weapons. This quantitative advantage, combined with the qualitative superiority of weapons like the M3 in their intended roles, created overwhelming Allied firepower superiority. German soldiers might have better individual training or tactical doctrine, but they were outgunned by enemies whose weapons worked more reliably and who had unlimited ammunition and replacements. The psychological impact of this material disparity cannot be overstated. German soldiers knew that every weapon lost was difficult to replace, while American casualties were immediately re-equipped with brand new weapons from seemingly bottomless stockpiles. This knowledge eroded German morale and confidence, contributing to the sense of inevitable defeat that pervaded German forces by 1945. The M3 grease gun story is ultimately about the triumph of pragmatic engineering over aesthetic prejudice. The weapon looked terrible, it felt cheap, it seemed fragile, but it worked, reliably and effectively, in every condition from Arctic cold to tropical heat, from desert sand to urban rubble. This reliability, combined with devastating close-range firepower and ease of production, made it one of World War II's most successful weapons despite its humble appearance. The German soldiers who mocked the M3 in 1943 learned, through painful experience, that their initial assessment was catastrophically wrong. The crude American submachine gun ruined countless German ambushes, cleared them from countless buildings and bunkers, and killed thousands of German soldiers who underestimated the ugly weapon until it was too late. By 1945, German veterans who survived encounters with M3-equipped American troops no longer laughed at the grease gun, they feared it. The transformation of opinion was complete, from objects of ridicule to instruments of terror in less than 2 years. The same trajectory followed by the P-47 Thunderbolt, the Sherman tank, and numerous other American weapons that Germans initially dismissed as crude or inadequate. The pattern revealed a fundamental misunderstanding by German military leaders about the nature of industrial warfare. In conflicts where production capacity and logistical sustainability determined outcomes, the nation that could produce adequate weapons in vast quantities, while ensuring they worked reliably under field conditions, would prevail over the nation, producing sophisticated weapons in limited numbers. The M3 grease gun embodied this principle perfectly, a weapon that was just good enough, produced in overwhelming quantities, and reliable enough that soldiers trusted it with their lives. That combination proved unbeatable. At the United States Army Ordnance Museum, now part of the collection at Fort Lee, Virginia, dozens of M3 and M3A1 submachine guns are preserved for historical study. Many show signs of hard use, dents and scratches from decades of service. Some have markings indicating service in multiple conflicts. All of them are still functional, capable of being fired if ammunition were provided. This enduring functionality, after decades of storage, represents the ultimate vindication of the M3's design philosophy. The weapons designer, George Hyde, never achieved the fame of other firearms designers like John Browning or Eugene Stoner, but his creation, the ugly little grease gun that almost everyone initially hated, proved to be one of the most successful weapons designs in military history. It served longer than almost any other submachine gun, was produced in larger quantities than most contemporaries, and earned the trust of soldiers who depended on it for survival. Hyde died in 1963, having seen his controversial creation serve through 3 wars and become a respected, even beloved weapon among those who carried it. In 1985, at a reunion of World War II veterans in Washington, D.C., a group of former infantrymen who had fought through Europe were asked about their most memorable weapon. Several immediately mentioned the M3 grease gun. One veteran, Carlos Rivera of the 36th Infantry Division, spoke for many when he described his relationship with the crude submachine gun. "I hated that thing when they first issued it to me. It looked like garbage, like something that would fall apart if you looked at it wrong. I complained constantly, begged for a Thompson, anything but that ugly grease gun. Then we went into combat in Italy, fighting through mountains and towns, and that weapon saved my life more times than I can count. It never jammed, never failed, just kept firing no matter what I did to it. I dropped it in a river crossing. It worked. Fell on it going down a cliff. It worked. Didn't clean it for 2 weeks in the Gothic line. It still worked. By the end of the war, I wouldn't have traded it for any other weapon. I'd take that crude, ugly, wonderful grease gun over the fanciest weapon ever made, because I knew it would fire when I pulled the trigger, and that knowledge kept me alive. This testimony, repeated in various forms by thousands of veterans, represents the ultimate assessment of any weapon. Not technical specifications or aesthetic appeal, but the confidence it gives soldiers that it will work when their lives depend on it. The M3 grease gun provided that confidence to American soldiers for half a century. The German troops who mocked it in 1943 learned, far too late, that ugly weapons can kill just as effectively as beautiful ones. By the time they understood this lesson, the war was lost and the crude American submachine gun had become one of the instruments of their defeat. The laughter died in the ruins of German cities, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, in the rubble of countless ambushes ruined by the reliable firepower of a weapon that looked like it shouldn't work but always did. The M3 grease gun had spoken, and its message was written in the blood of those who had underestimated American industrial pragmatism. In the end, the weapon that looked like a joke became one of the most serious instruments of Allied victory.